Sweet. Okay. So, like I said, my name's Zach. I am a software engineer, and I'll give you a little bit more background on me, but this is the Intro to Web Development workshop. And yeah, this is super exciting. I am lucky enough to be starting off the weekend here at Kurius, and it's awesome to see everybody out, and it's like a crazy number of people here. This is amazing. So big shout out to the organizers. This would not at all be possible without them. So definitely, if you get a chance, send them a message and say thanks for putting this together. Cool. So right into it. Here's the kind of the outline for what I'm thinking we'll go through today. At any point, like I said before, if you have any questions or need clarification on anything, just let me know, and I'll do my best to stop and try and answer questions as we go. So first things first, we'll go through a couple prerequisites. Mainly just some stuff to make this a little bit more interactive instead of it just being me talking at you. And a little bit about me, why people might want to get into web development as a career. Then I have this analogy I like to use as I explain web development and kind of the tools you use that I like to call the house analogy. And then we'll dive into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then at the end, there's a code challenge that I kind of have thought about that we can work through together once we have a little bit of a basis to work with for these three tools. And then at the end, some more resources to learn if you want to continue learning about web development. So with that, let's get going. Yeah, prereqs. You can, right now, I think it would be best if you opened up another window if you want to code along to open a CodePen account. They have social sign-on, so if you have a GitHub account or a Google account, you should be able to sign in really quickly with that. And maybe I'll give you guys like a minute to do that, just so that people aren't running to jump in.
You don't take a team.
That's always great though.
Sorry, what do we need to open again?
It's called CodePen. So if you go to codepen.io, that will be the website you're looking for.
Okay.
And I'll post a link in the workshop channel for anybody who didn't see it.
You know, I took pictures to rub it in my face.
I took pictures for myself. I didn't show them to you anyway.
Yeah, send them to me on Snapchat.
Cool. Is anybody having any trouble getting in to CodePen? Or anybody need me to stop?
Yeah, I have to make an account. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I'll give it another minute or so. Cool. Anybody else need a minute or so, or are we good? Cool. Okay. So with that, oh man, it's looking like we've hit our limit of screen people on the stream. I don't know if any of the organizers want to chime in. If we should just keep rolling and.
What we can do is we can screen share your screen share.
I love it.
Or if there's too many people, we can also move it to StreamYard. So depends.
Okay. Well, if that screen share of a screen share looks good, we'll just keep rolling with it. But yeah, we should be able to cover all this stuff, and we've got plenty of time. So,
Lewis, if you're there, what do you think?
Yeah, no. If you want to reshare it, because I can't even get into the stream myself because everyone else took all the spots. So, if you guys want to reshare the screen share, or I mean, if you, Leo, want to reshare it, go ahead. Otherwise, I'll need someone to leave so that I can get in.
Although honestly, my stream is my internet's kind of bad sometimes, and sometimes it just randomly breaks. But I'll
worst case scenario, I can literally just hop on Google Meets and we can just keep going from there.
See, now we have 3 people resharing the screen share. Perfect. that should work for now. And if the quality isn't sufficiently good for any of you, remember that we do upload all of these videos to the YouTube, and registered participants will have exclusive access to it. So you'll be able to watch it afterwards as well.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so that's good. Just chime in if you're having trouble. But cool. On that note, we will continue going here. So prerequisites. Hopefully, everybody's had their CodePen account created now. And the other one, a little bit cheesy, but I want everybody to be ready to learn. This is a fun tool set to be able to build with, and so I think having the right attitude is super helpful to getting a lot out of this. So yeah, sharing just a little bit about me. I graduated from computer engineering at Queen's in 2018. I was involved in a few different things while I was there, namely QHack. So if any of you are starting university soon or are in university right now in Canada and want to look, it doesn't have to be Canada actually, but yeah, if you're looking for a cool hackathon to go to, QHacks at Queen's is amazing. So definitely check that out. But yeah, so after graduating in 2018, I worked as a full stack developer at 10,000 Coffees, which is a startup based out of Toronto. There I did, like I said, web development. The tool stack there was mainly Angular with Node.js, Express, MongoDB, some Google Cloud, and a little bit of Python in there. And right now, my new job, which I started last week, was the founding engineering lead at a small startup called Skillful. So I'm employee number 2. And so if you're curious about startups, I've got a lot of experience in startups. So feel free to hit me up after this. Cool. So yeah, jumping into why web development. So I kind of wanted to give you my 2 cents on why web development might be a good career path if you're thinking about something to do long term if you're interested in tech. First of all, it's super fun, exciting. And,
可不可以用？
oh, I guess we're getting echoes. Okay.
Yeah, if it's not presenting, may you please just mute yourself so we can have a high quality workshop. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. So, why web development? It's fun, exciting, and I think it can be challenging in a lot of different ways. So, it's a fun thing to be able to do for a day job. Beyond that, JavaScript was the #1 most popular technology as listed on the Stack Overflow developer survey. So, there's a lot of people who use this. There's a lot of people who search questions in Stack Overflow. And so it's definitely, there's a lot of people there's opportunities with JavaScript development. And similarly, #2 on the list was HTML and CSS. So there's definitely, if you're a web developer, there's lots of opportunity to build things out there. Just looking at some kind of small numbers at a glance, there's over 60,000 open web development jobs in the US just on Glassdoor alone, which is like a massive amount of jobs. So like I said, there's always opportunity out there. And the other part that is like maybe not matter to everybody, but the starting salary here for an average web developer is around $65,000. So pretty good numbers there, and it makes it so that you can pay off all the student loans, just like I have. Yeah, so actually now jumping into some of the more technical stuff. So this workshop, we're going to be talking about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And like I said, I have an analogy that I like to use. And for me, it's called the house analogy. And the reason I say that is because just like a house, web applications or websites all have kind of 3 big chunks of things involved with them. The first thing you can think of is like the foundation and the frame of the house, which you can compare to HTML. Secondly, you have the things like the siding, wallpaper, roofing, and paint. Anything that makes the house look nice and pretty, that's like CSS. And then finally, you've got things like electricity and plumbing, any other sort of utilities, that's like JavaScript, and that's the stuff that really makes a website or a web app come alive. And so we'll be going back and revisiting the house analogy as we go through, but yeah, this is kind of the analogy. So jumping into HTML, HTML, like we said, is the foundation and the frame of the house. And HTML actually stands for Hypertext Markup Language. So it's not actually like a programming language. It's more of like a markup language. Like it's similar, very similar to XML. It's actually, XML is a superset of HTML. And what that means is it's a descriptive language that allows you to specify the structure of web pages. Like we said, foundation and frame, it's really, once you have that in place, you can really build a lot, but HTML is the building blocks. What we'll do, I think the best way to describe a lot of the features of HTML is actually build it. And so I'll share this link in the workshop channel, but that's the link that we'll be using for actually going and diving into some of this stuff. So when you get onto this page, and I'll share a different screen now that actually has this workshop on it. So I'll just give it 1 second. Cool, here we go. Yeah, so you'll see on this page, there's a little fork button in the bottom right-hand corner. Oh, did that ruin the recording? I don't know if that screwed everybody up, but sorry about that. So if you click fork this pen, that essentially creates a copy for yourself so that you can follow along as I'm doing stuff. So we'll use that to continue building. Cool. Nice. So like I said, as we go through this stuff, feel free to stop and ask any questions. I'm assuming if you have questions, other people will have questions. So definitely feel free to stop me.
I have a question.
Yeah, for sure.
So, how did you open a live server like on Visual Studio Code where it shows hello?
So this is actually on CodePen. So that's why I wanted to use CodePen, is because it's really easy to get up and running, and it's kind of nice. It actually just gives you these little editors on the side, one for each of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then it automatically just renders on the left-hand side here.
Oh, okay, I'll do that.
Yeah, cool. yeah. If anybody, Nico said in the chat for using VS Code, there's an extension you can use for live server, and yeah, you can definitely do that if you wanted to. I wanted to keep things nice and simple for us, so for today, if you don't want to mess around with any sort of plugins in VS Code or any other editor, you can feel free to just use CodePen. Any other questions before we jump in? Cool. All right. So first things first, the structure of HTML. Oh, mine is just a small page at the bottom. Yeah, if you're looking to change the setup of your actual editors, I'm imagining it's probably like this for whoever asked the question. You'll want to go to settings and put it on the right-hand side, or the left-hand side, whichever side you want it on, and that'll give you a little bit more space. Cool. Okay. So looking at the actual structure of an HTML tag or an element, the way that it works is there's typically on the left-hand side an opening tag, and on the right-hand side there's a closing tag. What the tags actually are is these little labels, the H1 inside, it tells you what the element is. And so every HTML element would have these kind of the opening and closing braces, and then the closing tag would have this slash in it to denote that it's closing. So another example here we could use is the P tag for paragraph. So P, H1, we'll get into what those actually are a little bit more, but we can do this again here. So now we have a second element on the page with an opening and closing. So these tags here, H1s, they are what we call headings. Kind of similar to what you'd have if anybody uses Notion, or same thing as in Microsoft Word. You have your different levels of tags for headers. So we have H2 all the way through H6. And so we can kind of close these off here and put like subtitle or some other text in it. And then we also have the H6, so we can kind of just play around with those. And that'll render on the left-hand side over here. Cool. So that's basically headings. They, like I said, they're like the same as in Word. You can use those typically to denote the different titles for sections on your pages. We'll get into like styling this stuff in a little bit, but this is basically headings. Any questions on headings before we jump into the next little section? Oh, can't see anything. I don't know. Is this for people watching Leo's stream? Yeah, okay. Well, I guess because we're recording and I want to make sure that we can get through everything, I'm going to keep forging ahead, and hopefully people can follow along with the recording afterwards if they miss anything. But for now, I'm going to take that as no more questions on these heading tags. So yeah, let's jump into image tags. So one of the cool things about web pages is that you can you can display images on there, and it's really nice to be able to put an image on your page. It really spices up the design of your page. And so what I was thinking today when we're building this out is that we could actually build I'm a huge Rick and Morty fan, so I think we should build a Rick and Morty fan page. So first things first is I'm going to throw in an image. So the tag for image is img. And then the way you specify the image URL is by putting src, which stands for source, and then you can put in whatever URL for your image. And so I'll share that image in the chat for anybody who wants to use that same image. But as you'll notice, this is a very high quality image, and so it's going to take up a ton of your screen. And again, we'll get to how to make it smaller in a second when we talk about CSS. But for right now, we're just going to leave it as is. Anybody have any questions about images so far? Cool. Okay. Nice. So we've covered tags, we've covered images, we've covered heading tags. Paragraph tags, we kind of already covered a little bit. Paragraph tags, as you can see below, we've got hello again down here. These are the tags that are used to display most text on websites. So typically you'll see big chunks of text that are all in p tags. So if you're looking to put text on a page, typically try and use a p tag. Nice. We can also add images if we want to our website. And so I think we should add a link to the Rick and Morty kind of website. So what we can do is let's add that up here, an a tag. And similarly to what we did for the image where we've got src for source, we've got href, which allows us to specify where you'll actually be redirected to when you click on our link. And so we'll finish off our tag here, and then we can put some text. So Rick and Morty website, let's just put that. Ooh, there we go, cool. And I'll paste in the link for the Rick and Morty website. And now you'll see there's a link on the page, kind of a hyperlink with an underlined link. If you want to try and click on a link, you can put literally whatever link you want. I'll share this in the chat for anybody who wants to use it. But if you command click or control click, if you're on Windows, I'm on a Mac. But if you command click, you can open this link in a new tab.
这上边小耳机的话，那行。
Oh, is that something you have a question here? Oh, cool. Okay. Don't think we had a question. Okay, so yeah, sorry. You can open that in a new tab if you'd like to. That way you don't have to navigate away from your code pen here. Overall, that's kind of the gist of A tags. But the cool thing is you can actually put those in paragraphs. So if we wanted to, down in our, I'm just going to move our paragraph tag so it's a little bit more accessible up here. We can also say, hello again. This is Rick and Morty website. Cool. And then we can actually make an anchor tag. The A stands for anchor here, actually. So we can make an A tag in here. Copy the link. And then we can also close off this A tag over here. And let's move that period outside of the anchor tag. And so now you can see as we changed it, we've got actually in our text block, we've got a link. So yeah, you can kind of throw links wherever you want. We could actually, even if we wanted to, in this case, let's just copy this A tag that we have from before and wrap the image in that A tag. I'm gonna tab that in, and you can close that off, finish that. And now our image is actually clickable. So if you click on the image, it will navigate you to the Rick and Morty website. Cool. I think that mainly covers anchor tags. Does anybody have any questions on anchor tags or linking to things on websites? Oh, looks like somebody's got a question. Never mind. Okay. Yeah. All right. Nice. So next up, I wanted to cover lists. So if you wanted to in your website, you could add a list of things. So there's two ways to add lists. The first one being unordered lists, which are represented by the UL tag. So let's just add one of those here. The second one being ordered lists, and we'll add one of those here. So unordered lists are the ones that are represented by bullets. Kind of, again, thinking of like Microsoft Word or Google Docs or something along those lines. Oh, yes. And there's people in the chat who are saying they get redirected when they click on it. We can add target equals underscore blank. Yeah, thanks, Nico, for pointing that out. So you can add target equals underscore blank, and I'll add that here. And you'll see that if you click on, at least for me, oh, what the? We got, oh, there we go. Yeah. Yeah, cool. So if I was to click on Rick and Morty website, it would open it in a new tab for me. And so that way it doesn't navigate away. Yeah, cool. So, sorry, jumping back into the unordered and ordered lists. Thinking back to like Google Docs or Microsoft Word, unordered lists are like your bullets like this, and ordered lists would have like numbers. And so what you want to do to actually create lists is there's a specific list item, and that's represented by li tags, and they're used in both ul and ol, so unordered lists and ordered lists, to represent the items in that list. So, for example, maybe we want to say, let's just do a paragraph here and say, here's why I like Rick and Morty. And then we'll have our unordered list where it's saying it's funny. And then I'm going to copy this just to make it a little quicker. And it's smart. Because we all know Rick and Morty is really smart. And it's funny and smart. Just because I don't know another reason why I like it. Oh, yes. Another one, yeah, somebody pointed out single line comments. Yeah, so you can add, this is in HTML, adding in comments. Those represent single line. So I could say some comments, and you could do those on single lines or multiple lines. It'll be different in the different languages. So HTML, it's by doing an exclamation or an opening tag, an exclamation mark, then 2 dashes, and then the closing is 2 dashes, and then the closing bracket. Sorry. Cool. So yeah, we've got our unordered list. Let's create an ordered list. So let's also say these are my fave characters. And then in the list, I'm going to put number 1, Crimbopulus Michael. And then I'm going to put Jerry Smith, because he's great. And then let's do Rick Sanchez. And as you can see, it automatically numbers for ordered lists. which is actually really, really nice. So you can move list items around, and you don't have to worry about automatically, or you don't have to worry about numbering yourself, which is really nice. Any questions on lists in it at all? If anybody's finding I'm going too fast or too slow, definitely feel free to jump in and let me know. But I'm just going to keep forging ahead if not.
If any of you don't want to ask a question in the voice chat, do it in #workshop, and we'll read out the question for you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks. Cool. So the last one I kind of want to jump into for HTML is kind of some input stuff. So one of the other nice things for websites is that you can collect information from people. And so in this case, I would like to collect and ask you guys, what is your favorite character from Rick and Morty? So typically how you would render an input is you'd be putting the input tag, and then you'd have to specify what kind of type it is. And so in our case, we're going to say it's a text input, but this is how you would specify all sorts of different things. You could do radio buttons, you could do checkboxes, you could even do numbers, phone numbers. And I'll share some links as to where you can find out more about all these HTML tags, so don't worry about figuring it out right now. But we're going to work with the text one for right now. And as you'll notice, we have a box that popped up on our code pen over here. That's not really helpful to us because it doesn't have any sort of text around it to tell us what to do with it. But what we could do is we could put a paragraph tag and say, okay, what's your favorite character? But I would say it's not the best form in terms of how you should write HTML. And so what we'd actually prefer to do is there's an element called label, which is used specifically for forms. And so what we could do is we can add a label where we could say, okay, for this could be like fave character. And this is just an identifier saying like on this input, what we would do is we put name, name equals fave character. And so that it would know what we're actually doing. And so like they're related in that sense, which is nice. But what I'd actually prefer to do instead of using these is let's just wrap the input in a label. And so to make it a little cleaner here. And one thing that might be helpful to some of you, I don't know if you're going through and finding that your code is looking a little bit messy, which is totally fine. There's a little click down here that you can format your HTML. So I'm just going to do that now, make things a little bit nicer for myself. Oh, a bit too fast. Cool. Okay. Not the image. I'll send the image to the Discord again for some people who it seems didn't grab that. Ooh, to support, that's a really good example. I've actually never had to use different languages for text inputs. So to Alex, to answer your question around whether text inputs support different languages, I would imagine so, but I also can't give you a definitive answer on that one. Yeah, okay. So any other questions in here? It looks like there's some troubleshooting going on with some link items, with some images stuff. So if there's a specific question on that, feel free to jump in and why isn't that working? Okay. To be honest, I would imagine that if you're copying a link from, oh, wow. Okay, sorry, this is my bad. I didn't realize that the link I'm sending for the image is actually just showing as an image. So I'm not sure if there's a way for me to like escape the image in Discord. I don't know if anybody can chime in if they know how to do that. Oh, there we go. So I just sent it with quotes around it. So that should be helpful too. I don't know if you can actually access those Discord. Yeah, cool. Yeah, cool. Okay, sweet. Hopefully that should work if you use the link that I just sent here. if anybody has any questions about images, feel free to jump in here. But if not, I'm going to keep going. Cool. So we've got now our input. So if I was to say, actually, my favorite question, or my favorite character is Morty Smith. So I'm going to type that in here. So now I've got this input, but what do I actually do with it? Well, you can't really do much right now. And this is actually a good point to point out. This is actually where our JavaScript would come into play. And so we'll kind of stitch everything together in a little bit. But for right now, what I wanted to do is actually just show you that when you're dealing with inputs, especially if you're dealing with a group of inputs, you typically want to put them in a form element. And so what we can do here is form, and it doesn't actually change anything the way it's rendered on the screen, but it'll make things easier for us because at the end, what we can do is we can do an on submit. So when we submit the form, we can call a JavaScript function. So in our case, we're going to hold off on doing that right now. But we'll be able to handle that when we get to the JavaScript section. So the other thing we could do is we can add a button. And let's add a button with some text saying submit. And we'll actually specify type equals submit here. I think we have, I don't know, there's somebody who's having a little trouble, Arcade. Okay. Hopefully Arcade, you'll be able to get going. If anybody is actually really stuck, please definitely jump in and let me know. But where will the input be saved? Okay, Alex. The input will be saved. We're gonna actually not save it to any sort of database or anything like that. That's kind of beyond the scope of what we're doing today. But we'll be able to manipulate that when we get to the JavaScript section. Okay. Cool. Okay, so this is the bulk of the stuff that I wanted to cover for HTML. I know there's probably a lot here, but the main takeaways here, I think, I'd like to highlight are HTML tags are built by having an opening and a closing tag, and then typically some sort of body of text. Jennifer, the form on submit is for, we're going to use that in the JavaScript section. So I'll show you that in just a little bit. Okay, cool. So yeah, but mainly the big takeaway here is that HTML tags have an opening and a closing tag. And then they also might have some, we call these attributes that specify properties of the HTML element. And that's pretty much the typical structure here. Like there are a lot of different HTML elements that you can use, HTML tags you can use. But like I said, I'll share some resources at the end that can help you learn a little bit more about those. Before we jump to CSS, does anybody have any questions? Well, I'm seeing more people typing in the chat, but that's super helpful, Emily. Yeah, that's amazing. This is a great example for anybody who's looking for a reference as to what like the general format for HTML tags is. That Emily, you just posted a great example in the chat. So feel free to use that as a reference for yourself. Melted, you said, how do you maximize the white space again? I'm not sure exactly what you're asking there. If you're on the chat here and you're the voice chat, if you can jump in, that would be awesome. If not, that's also totally cool. Yes. Okay, cool. If there aren't any other questions that I can help solve right now, I think we should jump into CSS. So in the slides, which I'm assuming you guys will have access to after this, there's another link to, I kind of split these examples up in my own code pens into 3 different states so that you can kind of pick up from where I left off. But that being said, like you don't have to follow along. Like we'll just use this first one to keep going from. But in case you ever want to go back, there's a CSS starter point and a JavaScript starting point, and those are all in the slides. So you can use those if you feel so inclined. Yeah, so CSS. That again, going to our house analogy, we know HTML is our foundation and our kind of the walls and the frame of the house. And now we're dealing with CSS, which is the siding, the wallpaper, the roofing, and the paint, which is kind of the stuff that makes, some say hard to CSS is hard. I say it is. Yes, I totally agree with you. CSS can be kind of frustrating, but it's also really fun because I think it allows you to add a lot of spice and variety to your website. So yeah, CSS is a declarative language that controls how web pages look in the browser. And so we'll jump in right now and I'll show you how to do a little bit of CSS work. This haiku bot is killing me. That's awesome. Cool. So now that we're back, we'll go back and take a look at our website here. And so I'm going to say, let's do Rick and Morty fan page. Let's change this up just so we know what we're looking at. Cool. And then even spice it up a little. I'm going to add my name here. Feel free to add yours. Cool. And then what I'm thinking here is I think the first thing that we'd want to do is maybe change some text on some color of some text. So maybe saying, hello there again, this is the Rick and Morty website. Let's go and change that. If somebody wants to put in the chat a color that they want to use, feel free to let me know. And I can kind of use your color to spice up the page. Ooh, okay. First one I saw was purple, so let's do purple. So this is the fun part, is you can actually use names of colors. And we'll see here, style equals color purple. Yeah, so that Alex made a good point here. What we can do is we can use a hexadecimal color as well. So you'll notice that our hello again, this is Rick and Morty, the Rick and Morty website, is now purple, but we can also do, let's take a look at here's why I like Rick and Morty. And so let's do style equals color, and then we can also do, let's just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So for anybody who hasn't seen hexadecimal before, hexadecimal is any number between 0 and 9, and also A, B, C, D, E, and F. And it allows you to specify a range of colors using 6 digits. And there's a bunch of different ways of storing colors on the internet. There's like RSA, RGB, RGBA. There's a lot of different ways. Yeah, base 16 for Michelle. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. HSL. Yeah, there's a lot of different ones. So what we can do is we'll just stick with these couple of using names and using hex for tonight. But that's awesome. So yeah, exactly. I do have a couple of Rick and Morty colors. So I can pop those in here too. Let's do. Yeah, I've got those in the CSS. So we'll pop into that in a second. I love that. Cool. So you'll notice the way that I styled the color for these was by adding a style attribute to the HTML elements. Oh, sorry. The blue that we just added with hex is here's why I like Rick and Morty. It's kind of hard to see. It almost looks like black. But it is there. It's changed. So yeah, sorry. So getting back to how we added the styles here. We added a style attribute. And then what we did is we actually wrote CSS in here. So the general format for CSS is the CSS attribute, or the CSS tag that you're going to use, and then the value on the right-hand side. And so in this case, you'll notice it's color for both of them. I hope that's not inline styling that I'm seeing. Yes, I know. It's so Michelle made a great point. A lot of people typically don't like using inline styling because it can mess up and make your HTML code a lot harder to read, especially when you really start styling up your website. And so in this case, we're showing it for demonstrative purposes, but you might not necessarily want to use it. It's fine to use it sometimes, but I would say it's best practice not to use inline styling all the time. And this here is inline styling, is an example of inline styling. But what we can do is we can actually jump into the CSS editor over here, and we'll talk about some different ways of adding styles that aren't inline styles. The first one being, what we can do is if we want to, let's say we wanted to style all of our list items the Rick and Morty green. What we can do is we can write li for list item, and what we're doing right now is we're writing a selector. So CSS, when it's in a CSS file, works based off of selectors. These selectors can be a lot of different things. Ooh, somebody had a really good question, Salty Ravioli. How do you reference the CSS and the HTML file? So if you are working on an HTML file locally on your computer and not on CodePen, what you can do is you can actually add in a style tag you typically add this into the head of your document, and you would then write your CSS. So just like we're writing li down below, you would write your li actually in between these two style tags, and you typically put it in the head. Yeah, and Shazam also put a really good example. You can actually link external files for your CSS. But for the sake of simplicity, I would say just getting started with style tags is probably the easiest. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, jumping back into the actual CSS over here. We want to style all of our list items, and we want to style them all with Rick and Morty green. So the way that you do this is with a selector. What we're doing, you'll notice it's just saying li. This is going to correspond to all li elements in our web page. And so you put these curly braces, and then inside we would put the same stuff that we did in our inline styles. And so just as a reference point here, you can go back and see we put color. So we'll put color, colon, and then whatever our color is. So in this case, it's going to be our hex value for the Rick and Morty green. So you can see it there now. And this is all based on all li elements will be that color. A fun one is that we could also use the wildcard, and that would style everything with that. There's a few different ones like that you can use, but we're not going to use that. We're going to use li in this case. You can use this with any element. So for example, if we wanted to do all p elements, like all of our paragraph tags are actually red, we can do that if we want. Alex has a question saying, is there a way to make it RGB, like have a different color each time? There are some different questions here around styling in different ways. You could use RGB in this way. You could, it's out of, it's 256, so we could do 155, 155, 155, and that's how you would actually do an RGB color. Yeah, so Michelle made a good point. For anybody who's really into the Canadian color, that doesn't work. So use color, spell it American. Awesome. Yeah, RGB you can do that way. Yeah, if you wanted to change the color for only a few of your list elements, yeah, you could do it in a specific way. Well, actually, let's do that right now. So what we can do is say we want to change the last element in our Rick and Morty, why we like Rick and Morty list, and we want to change that to be, I don't know, let's say we want to make it important. So let's say, or maybe, let's just call it the class color, or the ID color red. And this is like a really bad name. It's not a good example, but just for our purposes, we can use whatever we like. What we'll do is we'll add an ID attribute to our list item element here. IDs are a thing that you can add to elements to make them accessible based on that ID. So one thing you might notice on certain websites is in the URL, there might be a hashtag and some sort of string after it. So for example, it might be like https google.com / hashtag whatever. What that actually is it's referencing an element on the page by its ID. And so IDs have a couple of different purposes. They're kind of ways for you to jump around, but they are also really, they're usable in CSS as well if you want to use them. So in our case here, what we can do is we can add our color red ID to the list item, and then let's change the color over here to be red. And you'll notice that our last list item goes red. So Nico's saying the code looks so messy after this. I don't even know how to make it clean. So one of the things, like I said, it's kind of hard because the editor's a little bit small in the presentation that I'm doing here. But you can also click and there's a format option in all of these drop downs. So if you're in CodePen, you can definitely just drop down and click format, and that might make your code a little bit cleaner. Maybe it was never meant to be clean. Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm just trying to see if there's any questions here in the Discord, but it looks like everybody's doing okay. So one thing I would call out here is we just did some styling with an ID. I wouldn't typically recommend styling with IDs. It's kind of a bad practice just because IDs are typically supposed to be like a one-off reference. Like you don't want to have multiple things on here that have the same ID, like ID color red for 2 of these list items, because then they're not actually identifiers. Like IDs are supposed to be unique. And so typically you would use it once, and it doesn't really make sense to create an entire style selector setup for an ID for like one element. So typically what you would want to do actually is you'd want to use a class. So instead of doing ID, we're going to change this to class. And instead of having a hashtag over here, you do a dot. That specifies class. And so what that would allow us to do is we can now use this class wherever we want, and we can use that to okay, so people are dealing with some case sensitivity issues. So things are case sensitive. People are missing brackets. So yeah, definitely those are some things to keep in mind. Case sensitivity and brackets, definitely keep your eyes out for that stuff. Yes, exactly. Leo made a good point. Class applies to multiple, so we can use this class literally wherever we want. So for example, we can also apply that to our p tags up here. We can literally apply it to whatever we want. And so it's nice, we can just kind of throw things around everywhere. And classes are a really good way to make that happen. And then the nice part about it too is, say we actually change this and we're going to say, okay, we actually want, whenever we have something colored red, we want to make it actually the font size bigger. So we can change the font size using the font dash size attribute here. And so let's make it 30 pixels. And so you'll see all the text that's colored red now is automatically changed to be 30 pixels. And it's really nice in that case where you have a bunch of things that are already selected. You can make the change once and it applies to a bunch of different elements, as opposed, exactly, IntelliSense, which is nice. But yeah, so it's nice that it automatically applies to a bunch of different things. So that's really good. Nice. So we'll remove that just because it kind of makes things look a little weird. But now you've kind of seen classes. Where we're at here, that's kind of like the basics of selectors. You can select with by elements, you can select by IDs, you can select by classes. The other thing that we didn't talk about that somebody just brought up is there's an EM unit for like setting stuff for like dimensions. So we could use 30 EM. It's relative to container size, which is massive, but this is just an example of there's a bunch of different units that you can use for. Dude, I just used VH. Yes, Abby uses VH, which is awesome. Let's use VH and show you guys what VH does. That's VH is like a percentage, like 3% of the entire view height. Or if I did VW, it would be view width. Is that responsive friendly? Rule of thumb for classes, IDs, classes. Yeah, okay. Leo made a good point in there. So yeah, like I said, there's a bunch of different units for font size, and anywhere where you're using units, you can use a bunch of different units. So I'll leave that up to you to dive into a little bit deeper. And for right now, we won't worry about it too much. But typically, as a starting point, you would use pixels. So we'll just use pixels for us for right now. Cool. Okay. So next thing is font family. I think this font that we have right now sucks a lot. And so I want to use a new font. So what my plan is here is to include a font. And so there's a couple different ways you could do this. And it'll be different for people who are using an HTML page as opposed to CodePen. But what you can do is you can click open the settings here, and you can go to HTML. And there's a section here that says stuff for head. And I won't dive into this too much, but this is a font from Google Fonts. So you can dive into Google Fonts on your own if you want. It's a great spot to get fonts for your websites. It's really easy to use, and they give you like a link tag that allows you to pull in a font. But for your case, you can just use the font that I'm sending over. And I'll send it over in the workshop chat right now. Exactly. Yeah, Leo, great point there. Cool. So yeah, you can use this font that I just sent over and put it in the head of your document. Cool. So yeah, awesome. Yeah, Emily made a great point here around there's some different things you can do with selectors that are kind of more advanced stuff that I'm not going to cover, but yeah, good example from Emily in the chat if you're looking to dive a little bit deeper into selectors. Cool. So now that we have our font in the head of our document, we can actually go ahead and use that. And so the way that we'll use that is by using the font family. So similar to how we had font size, we'll use font family. And like we saw earlier, there's a wildcard selector. And just to make our lives a little bit easier, we can go ahead here and use the wildcard selector. So we'll change all the font for all of our text here. And as you see, it's a little bit of a funky font, but yeah, I think it's a pretty good Rick and Morty font. Just taking a look at some of the comments here. Is there a difference between strong and bold? That's a good question. So if you were thinking about it, there's actually a couple of different ways to make text bolded in HTML, one of which is the strong tag, the other which is the bold tag. This is kind of the crux of what can be difficult about HTML is there are, screen readers and accessibility, Michelle made a good point, is pretty much exactly that. It's semantic stuff. So semantic being that it's kind of about like writing proper HTML. It doesn't change the way things look, but for things like screen readers and accessibility, it's really, really important. For search engine optimization, it's really, really important. So I would say if you're really looking to build a really good website that is going to be used by a lot of people, you definitely want to take accessibility into consideration because there's going to be people that you're going to be making it hard for them to use your website if you don't do things in a semantic way. The other one here, okay, so Shazam had a question around using a caret, or not a caret, but the pointer here. So maybe we say, actually, I'm going to hold off on that one, and maybe Shazam, we could talk about that one after this. But yeah, just to keep things moving along, I know we only have about a half an hour left here, so I want to make sure we're using the most of it. Cool. So like we had before, this is a huge image that we have down at the bottom. And so one of the things that I'd like to do is I'd like to make it a lot smaller. So let's create a class on our image tag. And so let's call this Rick and Morty pick. And then I'll just select that and we can copy that into our CSS. And again, referencing it with a dot allows us to select the class, and we'll add some curly braces. And then what we'll do is we'll add a height. And let's make this like, say, 400 pixels. And you should see it resize on your screen. And I don't know if it's just for me, but this is a big weight off my shoulders because it's actually, we're able to actually see the image, which is nice. And I'm going to move this image up to the top just because I find it looks nicer way up at the top. Cool. And we'll just add a P tag around this because it looks kind of broken here, but I'll do a quick format. Nice. Cool. All right. I'm just looking at the chat here to see. Cool. Okay. So yeah, the one thing you might notice, how do you align and reposition the image? So we can actually dive into that in a second. I was going to save. Sorry. Yeah, I did move a little bit quick there. What I did, and I'll pull open the HTML a little bit more so that you can kind of see what I did. But essentially, I took the entire image tag that we had and I cut it and pasted it from the bottom of the page and moved it up just below our H2 element here. So it just moved to here. And then I also put a P tag around this Rick and Morty website anchor, just so that it would stop being in line over here. Does that help? Cool. Okay. If we do both inline styling and styling a sheet with the inline styling tape, yes. Okay. Thanks, Michelle, for answering that. Great question. Yeah. So the one thing that I think is important to note about, can I see the CSS again? Yes, totally. I will open that up right now. There you go, salty ravioli. Just missed how to resize it. Okay, cool. Yeah, that was based on the class. So we add that class in. Yes, again, Michelle just made a good point about important. Important is something that you can add to styles that allow you to ensure that they get added. But this is, again, related to the thing I was just going to bring up, which is CSS is actually short for cascading style sheets. And the cascade is actually something that is it's the defined way of how inheritance happens, or the way that the styles are applied. So essentially, what happens is the more specific things win out. So in our case, li is less specific than a class, and that's why the red style gets applied here. So again, just restating that, li is less specific than the class that we've created called color red. Another thing is that IDs are even more specific than classes. So what we can do is actually on that second of the red list item, we'll add an ID. So saying this is green, or let's say this is pink, and then we'll create a class or a selector for the ID. This is pink, and then color pink. And you'll see that what actually happens is our third list element ends up getting colored pink. And again, this comes down to the specificity, and Leo posted a really good link on CSS specificity from W3 Schools, which is awesome. So definitely take a look at that if you're ever stuck with like, oh, why isn't my class or my style being applied? So yeah, that's a good one. Again, going back to the important thing, the reason important can be kind of difficult is it's really hard to debug issues. So definitely try not to use important unless you really, really need to. Cool. Yeah, that gives us kind of three last things I wanted to cover in CSS before we jump to JavaScript. The couple that I wanted to cover are specifically around borders. So one thing that I wanted to jump into, we didn't really cover these in the HTML section, but there's an element called div. These are kind of like the basic building block for chunks of HTML. And so if you're gonna say put a bunch of stuff together, you'd probably put it together in a div. These divs don't really have any styles. They're the basic building blocks and really are just used to contain other elements in a kind of a group to make it easier to shuffle things and move things around on our page. One of the things is let's actually just wrap something else in a div. So in our case, let's wrap our form. Maybe not form. Form's not a good idea. Let's wrap both of our lists in a div. So div above the UL, and I'm just going to take that and indent it. And actually, backtrack one. Let's not do it on the div. Let's do it above the p tag, saying here's why I like Rick and Morty. So we'll do that right there. There's a div right here. And then we'll put the closing div down here below the ordered list. And again, you've got the format that you can do here, which is really nice. And so we'll do that. Then what I want to do is I want to, just for the sake of simplicity, let's add a style and let's add a border. So just let's put a border 1px solid and we'll do black just to make it super simple. And you'll notice now that our entire box, our div that we just put down has a border around it. Flexbox is awesome. Yeah, so there's a lot of people talking about Flexbox and grid in the comments right now. We'll talk about that in just a second. I don't know that I want to go too deep into it because it's just kind of a little bit more, I think, in depth than we can really go tonight. But we'll talk about it a little bit. Cool. So as you can see, you can put a border. The styling for border, yeah, divs just group elements together. Yeah, exactly. Raid Shadow Legends. That's exactly it. It's kind of the basic building block. And you can have divs that have other divs in them. So it's kind of up to you. You can do whatever you want. Sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends, yeah. Can you also put an ID in classes in a div? Yes, totally. It's you can put IDs and classes on every HTML element. Divception is right, yeah. Awesome. So yeah, borders are pretty straightforward. They have the first thing that you put here, and you'll notice this might be the first time that you're seeing this, but for some CSS attributes, you can have multiple values on the right-hand side separated by spaces. So specifically for border here, it's 3 values that we're expecting. The first one being how thick the border is. So in our case, let's change this to 10. And you can see that it becomes a very thick border. And then you can specify the type of border that we're doing. So in our case, we could change it to dashed. I think it's dashed. I never actually use these. Yeah, so you could do dashed if you'd like. And then you could also change the color. So we can use any of the colors that we were using for color, we can use there. So say we wanted to use that green color that we were using before, let's make the border that color as well. Cool. So now we've got this dashed box. Cool. So that's borders. The other thing too, which may be kind of tough to see, but let's do it with. I was gonna say we could do it with an image, but for the sake of time, let's do it with something else. So one of the things that people were mentioning before was doing backgrounds with CSS. So let's create another div for ourselves here, and let's add a class. So let's just say let's call this class circle. And what we'll do is we're going to try and make a div that's actually just a circle using just CSS. So we'll add our class here, and then what we'll do is just to start off, we'll use height, and we'll do 100. Let's do 200 pixels, and then we'll do a width of 200 pixels. Cool. So now we've got a box, but let's actually add in ourselves a background color. And let's use that, let's just use purple again. So now we've got a square that's 200 by 200 that has a background color purple. There is a cool thing I wanted to show about specifically rounding corners where you can do a border radius instead of a border. So for example, what we could do is we could say border radius 2 pixels. And you'll notice it very slightly. Let's do 20 pixels because I think that'll be easier to see. The corners start rounding. And so this is a nice way if you're like trying to make nice cards on your website or just a nice kind of like rounded rectangle, you can do that with border radius. But the other thing you can do with border radius is you can actually use a percentage. And I mean, the way that I typically make circles is I use just like 100% or like even 50% would typically work. And it would just keep your div a complete circle. So that's just one way of adding in an extra little piece here. Yeah, the last part I want to cover is padding, margins, and then flexbox and grid. So I'm going to do padding and margins in a second, but I just wanted to stop here and see if there's any last questions before we jump into that. Anybody have any questions before we jump into padding and margins? Cool. It's awesome. The chat's lit. Let's go. Okay, padding and margins. So one of the things that I think is important to see here is, can you jump back to the circle part? Are you looking for the CSS or the HTML for that? I mean, I guess they're both kind of on here. Okay, the CSS is just right here, if you can see that. Yeah, no worries. Cool. So, yeah, awesome. Let's do padding and margins. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pop up the inspect here on the web page. I'm actually going to change where this is and put it on the bottom of my page. So this might be foreign to some of you, but the inspect is going to be your best friend if you start doing web development. And so one of the important things I think here is we'll use our circle as kind of our starting point for using, and maybe we change this to rectangle instead, because I want to make it kind of one of those rectangular cards. So we'll change this back to, that's rectangle now. We'll change it back to 20. Actually, sorry, let's change this here. Rectangle. So we'll just change the class name. And then we'll change this from 50 pixels. So I just screw up the name of this. I might have. So we've got that down at the bottom, and I'm going to change that to 20 pixels. I'm actually going to move the rectangle up above so it's just easier for us to see. But say we actually just don't like how much padding and spacing is between the my name here and the purple box. So what we can do is we can use padding and margin, and this inspector element thing in the top, the left-hand corner here, is actually really, really helpful because it allows us to see how much padding is on an element. And I'll pop this up just a little bit further here, but you can see down in the bottom right-hand corner of the elements tab here, there is like a different way you can inspect margin, padding, or border padding, and then the actual element size, and in what order they are. So padding is inside any border you might have, and then margin is over here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to change the color on this to be something a little bit lighter. So I'm going to change it to, let's do BBB. And so actually this is another thing to point out. You can do shorthand for hex as 3 letters. So that's kind of nice. But yeah, let's just do a quick margin. Let's do a margin on top. So we can do margin top and then 20 pixels. And you'll notice in a second when it re-renders that we're going to have a margin 20 on top. And you can see that on our diagram down here and on the page as well. What we can also do is add inside of our rectangle, let's add in some text in a paragraph tag, some text, and let's do just like this. So now we've got some text in here, but it looks kind of silly now that it's kind of like on the corner. So let's actually use some padding on the inside to include, to move that away from it. So let's do padding 20. And so you'll notice the box just got bigger there. One of the things, if we go back to our little diagram, is if we use this to select that, you'll see there's like now green, which identifies our padding. So that padding, because we're not using padding top, we're just using padding. It applies 20 padding to all sides of the element. And same thing, if we removed this margin top, it would apply to all 4 sides. There's some different ways to do that, where you could do margin top, right, left, bottom if you wanted to, but this is just kind of the short form for it. And again, we could add in a border if we wanted to, just to show how you can add in a border as well on this thing. 1px solid and black.
The screen went black.
Oh, it did. Okay. Oops. Okay, let's see here. Is that any better? Is it still okay? Cool. Maybe I think I might have been away from Discord for too long. Cool. So as you can see, there's a little radius around, a border around our box, and we've also got our margin, we've got our border, and we've got our padding. Cool. So I guess my last question, because we've only really got 20 minutes, I've got I've got a little bit more time that I can run with here, but I want to make sure that we're good to get everything going. So for everybody who's here in the chat, would you prefer to do Flexbox and Grid to help like lay out our page, or would you prefer to dive into JavaScript a little bit? Okay, so we've got a resounding JavaScript. Okay, so let's jump into JavaScript real quick. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is in rip. Okay, so what you can do is you can click. There's a little console here on the page that you can click by clicking in the bottom left-hand corner, and this is what's going to we're going to use to render our JavaScript for the most part for just a second. Yeah, nice democracy. So, okay, cool. Now you want to pull up the JavaScript side of your page. So there's a few things we want to talk about. Like we talked about in HTML, comments were kind of the first thing I wanted to talk about here. Somebody had made a point of calling out multi-line versus single line comments. So you'll see here, this is a comment that I've put in at the top. And this is a multi-line comment represented by a slash and a star, and then a star and a slash to represent the ending of that. If you want to do single lines, you can just do 2 slashes, and this is also a comment. Shazam, you can hit me up, and I've got resources around Flexbox and Grid for anybody who's interested. Cool. So yeah, comments pretty straightforward. Number 2, I want to talk about initializing variables. So JavaScript, going back to our house analogy, is kind of the wiring and the plumbing that really makes everything come together. And to do that, it's like a scripting language, which means it's pretty fast, pretty lightweight, and allows you to do a lot of things. So if anybody here is familiar with a language like Java or C or anything like that, there's a lot of types involved in those languages. You don't really have to worry about strict typing in JavaScript. Everything can kind of be switched around, and it's kind of loosey-goosey in that way. So for anybody that helps, hopefully that makes things a little clearer. If it doesn't mean anything to you, don't worry about it. We're going to be starting from the ground with JavaScript here. But yeah, so let's jump in right away with variables. So similar to anybody who's taking high school math right now, you've got variables in math. Variables in programming languages are the exact same thing. So variables just store some sort of value for you. And in JavaScript, I'm not going to talk. There's a third way of storing variables in JavaScript with the keyword var. We're not going to talk about that because that's kind of old JavaScript, and I don't think you should use that. So what we're going to use is we're going to use the 2 keywords let and const. So yeah, Pogman throwing up because of var. Yeah, that's the right thing, I think. So let's do this. So maybe let's use our JavaScript code here to describe a character in Rick and Morty. So let's say we want to say let age, and this is how you would initialize a variable. You define a variable this way. So you're saying let, and kind of like a math statement, you're saying let the variable age exist. And then similarly for const, you would do the same thing. So let's say like name. But in this case, what we see above is that you can initialize a variable without giving it a value, whereas in this case with const, you always have to give it a value. So in this case, let's describe Rick Sanchez. And so you'll notice here, the statement is a little bit different than the first one in that there's an equal sign. So equals signs are used for assignment in JavaScript, which means we're saying that this variable name is now equal to the value on the right-hand side. And for anybody that this is unfamiliar, this is a string. So a string contains a series of characters that come together to make a word or paragraph or whatever you might want to that's held together. So Alex, actually, that you've got equals, equal, and double equals. Yeah, free CoCamp for Michelle. That's an amazing resource. I actually have that linked in the end of my slide deck. But yeah, so exactly. Michelle just pointed it out. Somebody pointed out that, or sorry, Alex said equals should be equals equals. That's not actually true. That was weird. Oh no. Whoops. I just got kicked. Ooh, I got an echo. I don't know if somebody else is. You can still hear me on the screen.
Yeah, we can still hear you right now. But we don't see anything.
Okay. Hold on 1 second here. I think my Discord just kicked me out, which was weird. So, all right, here we go. Back in. There we go. Nice. We're back. So yeah, we're assigning the variable name equal to Rick Sanchez as a string. The way that you can initialize age, you can do it later on if you want to. You can do age equals 42 here, or we could actually set age here too. And so one thing that you can do, in the way that I think it's really good to test stuff out, is by using the console, which is the thing we just pulled up. So how you do this is you pass in these variables into console.log, which is a function. So you can call this using these circle brackets. So in our case, we'll put age in and name. And you should see here in the console that it prints out your variables. So it should say 42 and Rick Sanchez. Cool. So if we wanted to, we could also, like we've done here, reinitialize the age variable. So if we got rid of this statement, it would actually still be just 24. And if we add that back in, it goes back to being 42. Cool. So that's the basics of assigning variables. The other thing too is if we wanted to take a look here and console log age and name before age gets assigned a variable, maybe I'll get everybody to post in the chat, or maybe not because we haven't talked about it, but there's two variables. Yeah, exactly. Peach has said it right. I was going to ask, but I wasn't sure if people actually knew what was going on there. So yeah, age and name, we would have undefined as the value for age. And the reason for that is because we haven't actually initialized age with a value. So any variable that does not already have a value in JavaScript is already going to be undefined. So undefined is just the absence of a value. There is also something else called null, spelled N-U-L-L, and that is used kind of in the similar way where it represents nothing. I personally, it's kind of weird. Some people don't use null. Some people use only undefined. I personally like to use null to represent an absence of value that I intended to happen, whereas undefined is typically going to happen as like I forgot to initialize a variable. Yeah, so that's kind of the difference between null and undefined. Does anybody have any questions on defining variables before we jump on to the next section? Cool. Seems like we're good. So yeah, nice. What might be actually nice for you to do is say like, hey, maybe we're running a simulation like Rick and Morty might, and we want to actually increase Rick's age. So maybe we want to go and reassign age is equal to age plus 10. So maybe Rick aged 10 years for some reason. And if you look in the chat or the console now, you'll see Rick's age is 52 instead of 42. So it's pretty simple to add values to numbers. You can also do this in a much simpler way by doing plus equals, where what we would be doing is, it's kind of short form for what we just did, but it's saying take the value of age and then add 10 to it. Similarly, you could you could do a minus equals, and that would put us down to 32 instead of 52. Or you could do times and times equals, or you could do divided equals. So that would be 42 divided by 10. And it's kind of just basic ways of doing arithmetic in JavaScript. It's the same way as doing this. Oh, Shazam, yeah, thank you for, oh God, I didn't even realize it was 420. Nice. Cool. So that's basic arithmetic. There's two other things that you can do that I think are yeah, exactly, nice. Yeah, it's so funny. But so what you could also do is, if we wanted to, let's add in just a third term to our console log that we're doing. And let's take the remainder. So we could do 5 remainder 2, and that would end up giving us 1. So you can also do remainders, and that's kind of helpful in a bunch of different situations. You'll kind of run into those as you do a little bit more programming, but I won't really jump into too many of those right now. The other ones you can actually do to the power of. So you can do 5 to the power of 2. And that will give us 25, which is nice. So you can do a lot of different stuff with math in JavaScript too, which is really nice. And there's a lot more you can do, but that's kind of the basics. Any questions on math? I would imagine probably not. I think we're probably pretty good. Okay, so we kind of talked about strings and assigning them there, but maybe we want to create a sentence for saying, hello, my name is Rick Sanchez. And we want to use this name variable. So what we can do is there's two kind of ways of doing this. You could create a string saying, hello, my name is, and then we could do like that. We have our 2 strings, and then you could actually, if you're noticing this, we've been printing them, and there's a space in between. So hello, my name is, and then you could do name, and it would print out with a space separated, which is not what we want to do. We want to print it as one string. So the first option to do here is you can actually do a plus. So kind of a weird thing that's happening in JavaScript, but you could add 2 things together, and you'll notice there's not a space there. So we'll add a space at the end of our first string. But essentially it does. Formatted strings are a thing in Shazam, and that's exactly the other thing that I was going to do. And so you can they're called template strings here. And what this allows us to do is to insert variables into a string we're building out. And so, yeah, there we go. We can throw in using the money $, and then curly braces, and it'll insert a variable. So we can actually just change this to whatever we want. We could change it to be like Morty Smith. And then the other thing we could do too is, if we want to keep that variable, we could always, if we save it, updated it, and changed to Morty Smith, it would actually change our string, which is really nice. Cool. So that's like the 2 ways of joining strings. It's really nice. Yeah, exactly, Leo. Thanks for sharing that with everybody. But yeah, it's really nice to be able to combine strings in that way. And I find it a lot nicer for myself personally to use template strings because it kind of lets you not break the flow of your string. So for example, hello, my name is whatever, and my age is age. And so we could put both of those into this string. Which is really nice, and you don't that doesn't break the flow of your sentence. And it's actually, if you name your variables properly, it actually makes things pretty easy to read. Any questions on strings right now? Okay, cool. That doesn't seem to be any questions on strings, but we'll keep going. So next up is numbers are not strings. Correct, Alex. Numbers are their own type. So you can see it even in the IDE here in CodePen, but 42 is in orange, the string's in green. those are two of the basic types in JavaScript. The next one that I want to jump into is the array, which is not a basic type, but or you typically call those primitives. But yeah, we're going to jump into arrays next. So arrays are essentially lists of items. So in our case, what I'd like to do is I'd like to make a list where I'm saying, all right, let's do characters. So let's just keep a list of characters in Rick and Morty, or like character names, let's say. And one thing you'll notice here, this is the first time we're creating a variable with multiple words in it, but I'm using camel case. So camel case, it looks at camel case because the first letter of each word is capitalized after the first one. It kind of looks like camel humps. Super weird. Like there's also snake case, which you might see in a language like Python. Or you've also got kebab case, which you can't actually do in JavaScript, but some people do that in other languages. So yeah, lots of different ways to name your variables. Kind of up to you. I would say the standard in JavaScript is typically camel case though. So that's what I'm going to stick with. In our case, what I'd like to do is I'd like to create an array of character names. We've already got one character name, so let's use that name. But I can also add in another one. So say we want to bring Rick Sanchez back to the party. Let's throw him back in here in a string. And then what we can do is let's just console log our character names. And yeah, cool. So now you can see in the bottom of our console, screaming camel case. I love that. I've never heard of that, but I absolutely love that. Oh man, that's great. Cool. So yeah, you can see our character names array is printed out and it looks like it's just a bunch of strings. So that's kind of the cool thing is like if you think about these variables as storing something, both of these are essentially evaluated to the same thing when we look at our array. It's just that the value for name is stored in a string that gets initialized over here, whereas Rick Sanchez is initialized right when we create the array, which is nice. What we can also do is if we wanted to, third character, say we want to print out our character names and later on we want to add another character. So let's do character names dot push. So what we're doing here is we're accessing a method of the array. So you may see this elsewhere, but this is kind of like what the function signature looks like. And then it would be like some sort of definition, but it's essentially saying that every array, so the array.prototype is used by every array that's ever made in JavaScript, and it's essentially saying that you have a function called push on every array, and that function push allows us to add a character. So let's add Jerry Smith to the list here, because we know that Rick would love having Jerry around. So then we'll console log again, and you'll see now that we've got at the end of our array, Jerry Smith. Alex, yeah, so asking me to repeat push. So push essentially allows you to push an element to the end of an array. It's just a really quick and dirty way to like add to the end of the array. Yeah. There's a lot of array methods that you can take a look at. And again, I'm going to share some documentation, a place where like that you can really dive into documentation for web stuff. And there's a lot more things like push. So like character names one of them could be example here .link. So every array has exactly shift, unshift, more. Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Michelle. There's a function or a property here of our array that allows us to know how many things are in our array. So for example, we know we've got 3 characters in our character names list. Yeah, slice is another one. Splice. Yeah. So yeah, this is the very basics of arrays. They're really good for storing information. You can store anything in them. So for example, if we also wanted to, I mean, it wouldn't probably be a good idea, but we could also store a number in with our character names. It wouldn't make any sense because our character names array should only store character names. But this is just to show you that you don't have to only store one variable type or one value type in there. You can store whatever you would like. Any questions on arrays? I know we're right at time here. I'd be happy to kind of finish the things that I planned for you guys in JavaScript before we hop off. If anybody else has time for that, I don't know, Leo, if you want to chime in here, whether we have time to continue or.
Yeah, so our workshop's like just from 1 to 2 hours. So if you want to go on, that's okay.
Oh yeah, let's do it. Nice. So yeah, that's basically arrays. One thing that might happen is you might want to actually access a specific thing inside. Oh, Peaches, good question. Actually, sorry, I'll get back to the accessing in a second. The thing that's happening here is CSS and SCSS. Yeah, they're like preprocessors for the languages that essentially allow, like, there's a bunch of utilities that SCSS would allow us to write CSS in an easier way. And yeah, Babel, I don't actually know what the right way to say it is, but is used to allow you to write modern JavaScript and run it in an old browser. So for example, if you write code for say Chrome and you want to run it on Internet Explorer 11, which would be hell on earth, but you could do it. Yeah, nice. Okay, so yes, exactly. We're getting some good clarification in the chat from Leo and Michelle. Awesome. So yeah, what we can also do is say we want to grab a specific array element. So say we want to specifically grab Rick Sanchez's name and use that in some other thing. What we can do is we can use square brackets and grab from a particular array index. And so this is a weird thing about programming in general, but it applies to JavaScript here, is that array indexes start at 0. So this isn't actually, like, it may be the first, Morty Smith may be the first element in the array, but the index for it is 0. Rick Sanchez would be element 1, and Jerry Smith would be element 2. So in our case, if we want to get Rick Sanchez, then we would be putting character names 1, and then you'd see it pop out in our console chat there. That's pretty much the way that you would access it. So for example, we could use our sentence kind of above that we wrote, copy that in here, and have it say, hello, my name is Rick Sanchez in this case. Yeah, cool. So we're using Rick's name from the array. Yeah, that's the basics of arrays. The next thing I want to jump into is objects. So one of the things that I think is hard to grasp about any sort of programming language is when you start getting these more difficult data structures like objects. So definitely please stop me if there are any questions here. So yeah, objects are typically a way of sharing a chunk of information that's all kind of related. So I think the way that I want to think about them today is I want us to use objects to store information about a person. So at the top, we've got, I don't know, I think Morty's like 14, so let's change his name. But I want to store the information about Morty in an object called Morty. So let's create an object called Morty, and objects are created using the curly braces. No to a car, it's the best example. Yeah. Yes, exactly. So anybody who's done Python, objects are the JavaScript equivalent of dictionaries. JS is 0 indexed, right? Yes, Shazam, you got that right. Cool. So what we can do here is say we want to say, okay, we've got the information above. Morty is age 14 and his name is Morty Smith. So let's add, what you can do here is add on the keys and values. So that's what objects are all about, is they're about keys and values. So the key has to be a string, whereas the value can be anything. And so in our case, like, you can actually have this be a string with, like, sorry, the actual quotes around it. And then what we'll do is we'll put 14. And if we wanted to print out our object, we can see, let's print out Morty. and you'll see that object has age 14. The thing is that this kind of stinks because right now we've got data that's duplicated in 2 different spots. Maria, good question, actually. Somebody brought up a point in the chat about const being for constant. Yes, so const is for constant, but what that means is that the value can't be reinitialized. What it doesn't mean is that the value cannot be changed. So what I mean by that is const name equals Morty Smith at the top cannot be reassigned to name equals Rick Sanchez. We'll get an error. You'll see that assignment to constant variable. That's not okay. Yeah, Leo made a good point. You could freeze objects or arrays. Tuples are not a thing in JavaScript. Typically, what you would do, I would say, if you're trying to do a tuple, would be either an object or an array. Tuples are a Python thing. Yeah. So sorry, going back to const here. You can't reassign them, but what I could do is I could actually add name plus equals, and I could say, if I want to say maybe he added his grandfather's last name onto his last name, we could actually you can't do that. So we can't reassign this at all, which is really good. So which is really, really nice. So constants you can't reassign, but what you can do, and you'll notice this down below when we actually push onto the character names array, is that you're able to actually add elements to the array. You just can't reassign it to a different array or to a number or whatever you want. Any questions on const while we're there? Cool. Okay. So going back to objects, yeah, one of the things that's kind of tough is right now we've got duplicated data between the age that we have set on the Morty object and the age that's on the age variable. So actually, one of the things I think we should do here is store the value of the age variable as the age on the Morty object. So the way that we can do this is by putting age here. And you'll notice that our object doesn't change, but if we change this value up here to 50 and say maybe Morty aged a year, you'll see the object now has the age 15. So that's really nice because we can use this age variable like we're using it in our console logs down here, but we can also have it live on the Morty variable, which is, I think, really great. One of the things I think is also kind of looking at what we're doing here with the Morty variable, it's kind of gross to look at, is age and age are the same thing on either side. And one of the, yeah, exactly, Alex. So what you're saying is on the left-hand side, the key that we're storing it at is age, and the value is coming from the age variable up above. Is that helpful, Alex? Yeah. One of the nice things, though, I was just going to get to is that you can actually do object shorthand, and you can do this. So what we do is we actually only write the name. And so what it does is it does the same thing as what we just did, but it assigns the key to be the age variable name, and then it also makes the value the age that we had up above. Yeah, thanks, Leo. That might be confusing. So if there's any more questions around that, please definitely stop me. Destruction. Yes, it is destruction. The other thing we can do here is we can actually do name as well. So let's add name in as another variable. So now we can see our Morty object has the age 15 and name Morty Smith. Yeah, cool. So it's nice now we have, there we go. Yeah, great. Leo, thanks for sharing that. if anybody wants to dive deeper into destructuring, you can dive into that if you'd like to. The notation that we're using for actually setting these object values is called object shorthand notation. So you can also look up that if you want a better view of what it's all about. So yeah, that's kind of the basics of setting up an object. But what happens, again, like we wanted to up above, for accessing the RIC and the array, how do we actually access any of these properties that are on the objects? Yeah, for Alex, yes, it is only possible for you to use if the variable has the exact same name as the key that you want to set on the object. So yeah, okay, cool. So for accessing the properties of Morty, we can do it in the same way as we did for the array, except for instead of using indexes, we're going to use the strings for the key that we're looking for. So for example, say we want to get Morty's age, we could do square brackets and then a string containing the word age. And you'll notice that it prints out age 15. The other thing that we can do is if your string key name follows the rules of JavaScript variables, which means you can't have like the kebab case we were talking about before with a dash in the middle of it. So like some value, like that's an invalid variable name. You couldn't have that. But for example, in our case here, age follows the rules. So we could do .age instead of having to do all the square brackets in the string, which is really, really nice. A lot simpler, and it's just kind of cleaner to read too. So thinking again, underscore does work in JS. Yeah, Alex, that does. So you could do like some underscore value though, if you wanted to. Oh, there we go. And that's a valid variable name, yeah. And so yeah, that's how you would access variable names. So you could, and again, you can use this value that we have in age as kind of like whatever you wanted to. So we could add 10 to it, and then it would print out 25. Yeah, that's kind of the basic of objects. Does anybody have any questions around objects? One of the other things about objects is that they also have methods, kind of like the character names have, like the array there has its own methods. I don't want to really dive too deep into them, but for example, one of them, you could do a length as well on here. Never mind. I got that one mixed up with, there's a library that I use that allows you to get the length of the number of properties on an object. So I got myself mixed up there, but yeah. Yeah, Michelle, that's a good question. I wanted to wait until we got to functions to do that, but yes, we will be doing the DOM stuff. I just wanted to cover the basics of JS before we dived into that. Cool. If there's no other questions on objects, we'll move towards loops. Just kind of basics. Okay, so one thing you might be asking yourself is like, okay, what happens if we? Okay, so for the for loops and conditionals and functions, does anybody actually? How many people want to cover for loops and conditionals? Because we can also just jump straight to functions if there's nobody that wants to hear about for loops and conditionals. Do loops, okay, cool. Yeah, sweet. Okay, so we'll jump into loops. So loops are really great for things like iterating over lists. Yeah, so we can do, the way you do it is you have for, and then you have, we'll use weird autocorrect, but yeah, let. So we're going to use let. And typically you would use the variable I. I'm going to do index just to make it a little easier for us to read. For let index equals 0, I is less than, and we know we have 3 character names in our character names array. So we're going to iterate over that. So let's say less than 3. And then we're going to do I++. So this is something we haven't seen before, but I'll show you exactly what that does. And then we will console.log this out. So what we're going to do here, oh yeah, I'm using I, and it should be indexed. Cool. So, yeah, what we're doing, this may be a little complicated, but essentially we're saying there's for loops. For loops allow you to iterate over a certain number of times. And the first, it comes in kind of 3 chunks. The first one being in the initialization of the variable using, yeah. And it's funny, Shazam, you say I stands for index. I never knew, but I think J was just used as the next one because it was just the simplest next choice, and then K as well. But yeah, for me personally, I know I like to write my variables out with longer names so that if somebody else comes and reads my code, it's a lot easier for them to do that. Whereas if you use all these small little, yeah, you could use whatever you want. This could be A if we wanted to, though. It could be literally any variable name. Cool. So yeah, like I said, it comes in 3 kind of chunks. The first one is initializing the index for counting over the array. The next one is what is the condition for our loop? So what's going to say when we end our loop? So in our case, it's saying we want to go from index 0 to 1 to 2. And then once it hits, so it's less than, if it ever hits to the point where it's equal to 3, we're going to stop. And then this last statement is kind of the increment statement. The increment, this plus means take the value of index and add 1 to it. So what's going to happen is every single time we go through this loop, it's going to go through and execute the code that's in these curly braces. And then it's going to go and it's going to increment the index value by 1. So in our case, let's just do this. Let's just print out index. And so you'll notice it says index 0, index 1, and index 2. And that's because we're iterating it over 3 times. If we change this to 10, you'll notice it goes from 0 to 9. We've got somebody doing an infinite loop, which is great. It's always fun to hear about your first infinite loop. Cool. So yeah, nice. We've got these. So what I actually want to do is, instead of writing 3, because we know 3 is the number of character names we have, but I'd like to actually do character names dot length. And so in our case, we're going to iterate over the number of character names. And going back to our array accessing that we did earlier, let's do character names at index. And so this is kind of cool. We can pass in, index is just a number, and we can pass in index to be able to access at each individual index, which is really nice. This is pretty basic, but this is typically kind of the format for loops. Is like you'd have your start condition, you'd have some sort of condition where you're iterating over a list of things, and then you'd have your increment by 1. Pretty straightforward, or not necessarily straightforward, but pretty standard. Any questions on for loops? Seems like we're doing okay. I'm going to hold off on while loops just for the sake of time, but there are also while loops where you could do while some condition do something else. But yeah. That's another one where it's like you don't necessarily know the end condition right off the hop, whereas for loops are really good for iterating over a list that you know the length of. And so that's kind of the different use cases. The last one before we get into functions, which I think is the big fun one, is conditionals. And so what we can actually do is inside our loop, let's add an if statement. So the very basic if do recursion for funsies. Yeah, I don't want to hurt anybody. That's not fun. So yeah, we'll make an if statement here. Sorry, for anybody who doesn't know what recursion is, it's functions calling themselves. And typically it means that, it's a mind bender. You can end up in infinite loops really, really quickly, and it's not a ton of fun. But yeah, cool. So let's look at conditionals. What I want to do here is let's make a condition where we're saying if the index is 1, then actually, let's do this. Let's say if the name is Morty Smith, then let's print out age. So this is going to be, let's cut this out here, and let's create ourselves a variable called current name, and set that equal to character names at the index that we're at. And then we'll still print that out. So we'll do character name. And then we'll also use character name in our conditional. So we're going to say if character name equals, so 3 equals, and sorry, my font here is a little bit weird, but that's 3 equals signs. What that means is it's saying if it's the exact same as this, so somebody might pipe up and ask about equals versus triple equals. Double equals, what it does is it converts the thing on the right hand side to the type of the thing on the left hand side, whereas 3 equal signs compares them as they are without doing any sort of conversion. So we want to do it as like a equals, 3 equals, so that it's not doing the conversion. So in our case, if character name equals name, we want to console.log age. Character name. I think current name. Whoops, that's my bad. We're using the wrong variable name here. Nice. Okay, cool. So what we see here is that when we find Morty Smith, it logs out Morty Smith on line 39. And then on line 41, it logs out age 15. Cool. And then Rick Sanchez, Jerry Smith get printed out on the next iterations. But their age doesn't get printed out because their name is not equal to Morty Smith. Anybody else have any questions around conditionals? These are pretty basic. You can do like a not equals to. So we'll print age both times that it's not equal to Morty Smith. So Rick Sanchez age, Jerry Smith age, which is backwards, but you can do that. You can also do comparisons of numbers. You could do like a greater than or equals to, less than or equals to, comparing numbers. You can compare dates. There's lots of different stuff you can do with comparisons and conditionals. But essentially, if you need to say, I only want to do this in this particular case, if statements are probably the way to do it. You can also have else if statements. So in our case, this is a pretty basic one. So else console log. We're going to console log unknown. So we're saying we just don't know the person's name if their name's not Morty. So Morty Smith 15, Rick Sanchez unknown, Jerry Smith unknown. So yeah, that's kind of nice. We don't have to worry about that so much, and we've got the kind of if and else statements going there. There's also an else if condition. So we could also add in a second condition where we're saying maybe if the current name equals triple equals Rick Sanchez, and because we think Rick might be actually an infinite being. Let's say at math.infinity is what we want to print. It's just infinity. So we're printing the value of infinity, which is great. So fun little math thing there, but yeah, that's kind of conditionals in a nutshell. Is you can do if, you can do else if another condition, and then you can do else And that's kind of the crux of it all. Are there any other questions specifically around conditionals? Okay, cool. All right, lastly, we're going to do functions. How many ifs can you fit? You can fit as many ifs as you want to fit. You can literally do whatever. Like, there's only one if per like block, so it'd be if, else if, else if, else if, else if, else. But you can put as many ifs in your page as you want. Okay, cool. So the last thing I wanted to cover today is functions. And so functions are really good for allowing you to create code that is reusable. So in our case, what I want to do is I want to create a function that will allow us to handle the form submit that we get here. So let's just say handle submit is going to be the name of our function. And then this is the structure for creating functions. So you use the keyword function to define a function. You then name the function. So this is the generic name. So function, function name. Oh my goodness. Function name. And then this is your input where you can define input values to your function. And then that allows you to use the variables that get passed in. So in our case, we're not going to take in any input variables right now. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to do some DOM related stuff, which is, I know, something people have been calling for. So the DOM is kind of like the thing that lives above HTML, and it's kind of like the way that the HTML that we wrote above is represented. So for any of you who know any sort of data structures, or can just kind of like visualize it, like you've got family trees, which are essentially a tree data structure. And it's like you have a root and then you have a bunch of branches that branch out from them. And it's the same way with HTML. HTML, there's like the root of your file, which is like the HTML tag. And then you've got all the other tags kind of underneath it, where you've got, like in our case, we had divs that had paragraphs in them, that had anchors in them. Like it's just kind of like things keep branching off, and the DOM is the way that's represented. And the good thing about most modern browsers is they have a way for you to interact with the DOM kind of on a programmatic basis through JavaScript. So for us, what we can do is we can do document, which allows us to get access to the document, and then get element by ID. And let's just say we're going to call it, Raid Shadow Legends. Yeah, I can explain the DOM again. Just give me a second. I have to refresh my page because it's not working right now. Yeah, so the DOM is essentially a representation of all of our HTML code, but represented for the underlying JavaScript and like HTML engine in the browser. What it does is it says there's like a root node, and then there's a bunch of branches off of that root. So it's like, in our case, we've got HTML and then body, and then in this case right here is a perfect example, is like div and then p. And essentially what we're saying is HTML is the root, and then under that is body. But then if we go over here, these elements that are all in this file right here that we're looking at all share the same ancestors, which are HTML and body. But this one, in this case, is H2. And then over here, it's the same thing, but it's H1. These are all the same HTML and body, but it's essentially a way for us to interact with these nodes. And the DOM is just kind of like it's called document object model. And it's kind of just like a fancy name for a tree structure that holds all of our HTML in it. Does that help at all? Raid Shadow Legends, I know it's not necessary. Okay, cool. It's kind of a hard concept to wrap your head around until you know a little bit more about data structures, I think. So yeah, maybe just take a look at trees, and that might help with tree data structures. But in our case, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get access to, for our input over here, let's do ID equals your answer. Let's do that. So what we're going to do is going back to our JavaScript. We've got our function down at the bottom. Document get element by ID, your answer. And so this is a function that operates on the document, like the DOM, and gets an element from the DOM based on a specific ID. And so we can say, let's just use LM for the short for element. And let's just console log the LM. And as you'll notice once we save this, that we're not going to actually see anything. The reason for that is you actually have to call the function that you're using. And because it's a reusable chunk of code, so it can be used in a bunch of different spots. And so in our case, what we're going to do is the lines below, we'll just do handle submit and call our function. And now you can see it specifically grabbed our input tag. So that's great. We have access to it. The problem is if I go down and I type in this box and I click submit, you'll notice it changes my page and breaks it. So yeah, let's not, that's something that I don't necessarily want, right? We want to be able to handle our answer over here. So let's go and actually add in our handle submit function into our code. So you'll notice there are some people asking before about the on submit attribute here on the form element we created. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to be using the handle submit function and putting it in here. And just put something in here. So it's still not going. So what we're going to actually have to do is just do this, where we're actually going to call the function when on submit happens. So this essentially says on the submit event, we're going to call handle submit. And again, it's going away from this. So what we need to do is we need to take the input event, and this is just kind of like a weird step you have to do because sometimes when you're using forms, it tries to automatically handle it with the browser. We don't want that. So the event.prevent default stops the default event from happening, which would cause the redirect. And for some reason, I'm not doing this properly. Give me one second. I just need to check my code that I have over here. Yeah, the default event, Alex, it tries to submit to a specific endpoint that you would specify through attributes. But we don't want to do that. We want to handle it ourselves. Sorry, here I'm just trying to make sure I've got this down right. Yeah, Shazam, you're right. The best part about the coding is the debugging. I feel like we need the Jeopardy music here. Okay, so let's just do this. I think this might help us out. Our form. Let's just do this. Okay. All right, so um, okay, this is lovely. Now you're seeing what's actually like to do development in real time, because all of this other stuff has been super planned out, and then this is the one where it's like, this is real life. So I'm doing document get element by ID, and I want to grab the our form element, and then we want to add an event listener to it. And so now I think we should be good. Oh man. Okay. Oh man. Oh, that should be submit. Sorry, that's my bad. That should be good now. Hey, there we go. That's what we're looking for. Cool. So, sorry, let me re-go through what we just did here. I think now that'll be a little bit clearer. So, what we did here is doing some DOM manipulation stuff here. This is, again, a document allows us to access the DOM, and we, again, grabbed an element by ID. So, we grabbed our form by its ID, and then we added an event listener. So, event listeners are things that allow you to listen to events on the platform, pretty much exactly what they sound. The way that you use them is you specify which type of event you're trying to listen for, and then you specify which type of, or sorry, which function you want to use to handle that event. So in our case, we're listening to the submit event on our form, and then handle submit is the way that we're using it, is the way that we're handling it. So again, saying we automatically get this event variable passed in from a form, and then we want to use that event to prevent the default action like we were talking about. And that allows us to no longer redirect it when we click submit. And then we also use the document to get access to the your answer element. So what we want to do here is we actually want to do lm.value. So on submit, now we're actually seeing the value of our form. And so I think the thing that I'd like to do here is, can the function be anywhere in the docker? Does it need to be after? The function, so this is a really good question, Alex. And for anybody who is kind of interested in this stuff, it's one of the things about JavaScript is it's called scoping. And so functions get scoped to anywhere, so they get hoisted. It's a term that means they take the function and when it runs the code, it essentially pulls that value up to the top. And so anywhere that you want to access handle submit can be used anywhere, but it's not the same for const and let. What that means is it can actually, like if I tried to access name up here, so I try to go console.log name, you'll see that I get an error in the console telling me that this variable it's an uncaught reference, because const and let don't get hoisted. Yeah, so both of them don't get hoisted, so you end up getting errors. And so again, just to restate this, functions get hoisted, variables do not. So you can use handle submit anywhere. So it could be at the top, could be at the bottom. Nice. Cool. So now that we've got our value on submit, what I'd like to do is I'd like to add that to a list. So let's create a list down here. let's call it an unordered list because we don't want to say what order they're in. Right, so we've got an unordered list. Let's make an ID, and let's just call this output. So now that we've got our value, let's just say new character name. Oops. Oh man. New character name. So we'll do that. We've got a new character name. And then what we want to do is let's get our output list equals document.get element by ID. And we're going to get the outputs. So we've got that here. So we've got now our output list. And let's just console log that just to make sure that we've actually got it. Okay, that didn't seem to like it, but maybe that's just because we got nothing in it. Oh yeah, we're not submitting, that's why, whoops. There we go, cool. So now we can see that on submit, we get access to our output list. And what I'd like to do now is using that output list, oh, now we're gonna have to test me adding stuff. Okay, so add element to DOM. Let's do it. Append child. Yes, that's what we're looking for. Append child. And we want to append a new node. So we want to create an element. And child, yeah. So this, again, Alex, goes to the thing we're talking about the DOM, where it's like a bunch of nodes. And another way of thinking about it, instead of roots and branches, is about parents and children. And so each element in the DOM has a parent, and you could potentially have children as well. So in our case, what we're trying to do is each list item in our unordered list is a child element of the unordered list. Yeah, weird terminology, but yes, that's what we're doing. We're appending a child. Output list append child. So we're going to create a new element, and what we're going to do is document.create element. We're going to create a new list item, and so you'll notice. Yeah, okay. So yeah, you'll notice when we click submit, it actually now adds another list item. There's nothing in it, so we need to figure out how to add that in. But we're adding a new list item, which is kind of cool. Cool. So what we want to do now is we want to do another one. We want to create, maybe not new elem's a bad name for it, but maybe let's say a new list item. And new text node. So let's do document.create text node, and then we're gonna pass into this function the text that we want. So this, in our case now, is going to be the new character name. So now we've got our list item, we've got this new text node. Now we need to figure out how we're actually going to put that on the DOM. So we need to append the text node to the new list item. So that's number one. Let's do new list item dot append new text node. And then we want to do append child new element. There we go, yeah. And so now if we were to really go back to it and we say, all right, what's my favorite character? So maybe I don't see Summer Smith on the list. So let's use Summer Smith. And we're going to submit. And now you'll see, woohoo, we have Summer Smith on our list. So now you could actually build stuff on the DOM using your code. And so, for example, we could go and maybe access something from our database, and pull that and put it on our list. Like you could also save the input from the user, all sorts of different cool stuff now that we have the code. And just to like really emphasize the handle submit function, how reusable it is, what we could do is like, I mean, it's not super reusable because we're specifically accessing by ID a specific set of things. But you could call this from another input if we wanted to, or another submit button, which is really nice. And so you could reuse this code. Anybody have any last questions? I know we're over time here, and people will probably have to get going. But I just wanted to make sure we covered some DOM stuff for the people who are really keen on doing that. Any questions on anything that we haven't covered? Anything that we have covered? I think for me, this kind of wraps up what I was hoping to cover for you guys. But yeah, happy to answer any questions, or anybody who wants to shoot me a message on LinkedIn or an email. Yeah, I've got the final challenge here. So I know we're past time, so I'll hop back into the slides actually right now. Let's do that. Cool. Yeah. Okay, so going back to here, code challenge. So what I was going to get you guys to do, and you can feel free to do this. This is actually something, we never got to Flexbox and Grid. I've got resources for you, Peaches, so I'll send those your way. But the code challenge here, what I was going to get you to do is I really like this website called Dribble. Dribble is actually a resource for designers to share kind of their designs online in kind of like a portfolio way. But I really like to go on there to find designs from like websites and try and recreate them myself, because I think that's the kind of best way to learn front-end web development, is really dive in and try and build things. So what I did is I found a really basic kind of chat app, and I was like, hey, that could be something that we could all try and build together. And so obviously it took a little bit longer than I kind of expected, but I will, again, this will be in the slides. So for anybody who's curious and wants to try it, feel free to try it. You can make it CodePen, you can make it on your VS Code editor. And I'm happy to like help you walk through if you get stuck on any sort of answers or things. So that's the code challenge. Does anybody have any questions on the code challenge? The gist of it is just to build out the front end for this website that I've got here listed on the screen, like this little chat app. Not to necessarily make it functional, but I think it's just a starting point. Yeah, it's just the front end, not a back end. Yeah, it's just kind of like remake it. And I think for everybody here, it's just like kind of a starting point. You can go into as much depth as you really want. Like, you don't even have to add any sort of JavaScript to it if you don't want to. But I think it's also really cool where you could, like, in the write a message box, you could make it so we do exactly what we just did here and add to the DOM a new message to the chat, which would be cool. You don't need to save it to a database or anything. But even just to dynamically render content on your DOM, yeah, that's the thing I would say to do here.
Right. Just to add on, we're actually hosting the challenges on Kurius's own platform, which is called Hack It Forward.
Okay.
I'll send the link right into the chat, so this is where you'll be doing all your submissions.
Amazing.
So, register for an account. Post the link right into... I'll post in the workshop chat right now. My computer's lagging. Ugh.
Amazing. Okay, cool. And then, yeah, like I said, if you want to learn more, there's some resources I have here. Somebody already mentioned Free Code Camp. Yeah, Alex, if you if you do find this is hard, like, again, you don't need to do any crazy for this with JavaScript. I don't think. I would recommend just start with HTML and CSS and see if you can get the hang of moving things around. I think it's more just to get you practicing. Yeah, and so yeah, as I said, it's just try and jump in and do a little bit if you're curious about learning more about web development. Cool. So yeah, these resources, Free Code Camp. I think it was Michelle had mentioned this. Great resource. I used it when I started learning web development. I think it's great because it gives you small bite-sized exercises that you can do. So that's awesome. Mozilla Developer Network. This is the one I was going to tell everybody about, where if there's a question that you have about how to use an HTML element or a CSS keyword or a JavaScript function, like this is the place to go and answer your questions, because they got literally everything. The last two are specifically around Flexbox and Grid. So for anybody who doesn't know what Flexbox and Grid are, Flexbox and Grid are ways of orienting and kind of aligning your content on your screen, your web page to make it a little bit more visually appealing. I know we only kind of really did like a top-down approach to our design tonight. But if you really start doing things on the web, you're going to need to move things around in a different way. And so Flexbox and Grid are two great ways to do that. Beyond that is kind of the end of the workshop for me, unless anybody else has got any questions. And so if you want to get a hold of me, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter, or I'm on GitHub as well, like whatever makes sense. And I'll put my email in the chat. If you're curious about talking about web development, or you're curious about talking about just anything related to startups, feel free to shoot me a message or an email, and I'm happy to set up time to chat. And thank you for spending your Saturday night with me. I know this is probably not everybody's typical Friday or Saturday night, but this is awesome.